In the early hours of a June morning in 1942, roughly 500 nautical miles from a tiny American outpost, a Japanese fuel tanker moved through dark waters. The vessel was part of a larger force carrying thousands of troops for an invasion operation. Around it, escort ships maintained their positions, confident in their mission's success. Intelligence reports had convinced Japanese commanders that American air capabilities consisted mainly of outdated fighters and a few land-based bombers operating only during daylight. This assessment would prove catastrophically wrong. Just before 2 in the morning, an American flying boat approached at extremely low altitude. The aircraft, painted in standard naval grey, carried 7 crew members working at their stations. In the nose compartment, a bombardier peered through his sight, making calculations. Above, an engineer monitored twin engines. Gunners manned their positions while a navigator plotted their course through the darkness. Suspended beneath the wing was a weapon that Japanese planners never imagined this particular aircraft would carry against surface ships at night. The pilot brought the flying boat lower, descending to masthead height as the ocean surface rushed beneath them. Ahead, Japanese vessels appeared as silhouettes against the horizon. The bombardier completed his final calculations, compensating for speed, movement, and distance. At the precise moment, the weapon dropped away. Seconds later, it struck the tanker's hull below the waterline. The impact sent shockwaves through the vessel. Damage control teams rushed to assess flooding, but the ship could maintain speed with the convoy. Yet, something profound had occurred. Something Japanese naval intelligence wouldn't fully comprehend for many months. An American patrol plane, dismissed by doctrine as purely a reconnaissance asset, had just executed the only successful American aerial torpedo attack of the entire battle that would unfold over the coming days. Throughout the Japanese convoy, sailors and officers tried to process what had happened. They'd detected no formation of torpedo bombers. No fighter escort had preceded the attack. A single aircraft, operating alone in complete darkness, had delivered a weapon against a maneuvering target at sea, then vanished back into the night before defensive guns could engage it effectively. Within hours, reports reached the Japanese flagship. The attack troubled senior officers, but not enough to alter their fundamental assessment of American capabilities. The aircraft was slow, with a maximum speed of only 179 miles per hour. It was lightly armed compared to purpose-built bombers. Japanese intelligence had correctly classified it as a long-range patrol aircraft optimized for reconnaissance, anti-submarine operations, and search and rescue missions. What they failed to grasp was the aircraft's payload capacity and the American willingness to employ patrol planes in offensive roles for which they hadn't been originally designed. The assumption, built on years of naval aviation doctrine, was that reconnaissance aircraft scouted and reported, while specialized attack aircraft delivered ordnance. These categories didn't overlap. This rigid thinking would prove extremely costly. The patrol flying boat had first flown in March 1935, emerging from a naval requirement for long-range maritime patrol. The design featured a parasol wing mounted on a pylon above the fuselage, reducing drag. Retractable wingtip floats folded upward during flight, further improving aerodynamic efficiency. By 1936, the first operational models entered service. Subsequent variants incorporated more powerful engines and airframe refinements. One variant introduced distinctive waist blister gun positions. Another version, introduced in September 1940, became the most numerous variant. An amphibious version added retractable landing gear, allowing operations from both water and land runways. This versatility made the aircraft valuable across the vast Pacific theater, where airfields were scarce. The aircraft's specifications reflected its design priorities. Powered by twin radial engines producing 1,200 horsepower each, it achieved a maximum speed of 195 miles per hour and cruised efficiently at 125. Its operational range exceeded 2,500 miles, allowing patrols lasting 15 to 20 hours. The crew of 7 to 10 included pilots in the cockpit, a flight engineer, navigator, radio operator, and multiple gunners. For offensive operations, the aircraft was equipped with precision bombing instruments. 4 bomb racks beneath the wings could carry a total load of 4,000 pounds in various configurations, including general-purpose bombs, depth charges, or combinations of bombs and torpedoes. Japanese intelligence officers had documented these specifications through pre-war observation and technical publication analysis. They understood the aircraft's range and endurance. They recognized its value for maritime patrol. What they fundamentally misunderstood was how the United States Navy intended to employ it when circumstances demanded offensive action. Japanese naval aviation had evolved along different philosophical lines. The Imperial Japanese Navy organized its aviation assets into highly specialized categories. Carrier-based attack aircraft, land-based naval bombers, each type had been designed and optimized for specific mission profiles. Reconnaissance duties fell to float planes, launched from cruisers and battleships, or to specialized land-based patrol aircraft. These scouts located enemy forces and transmitted positions to strike units. The doctrine didn't anticipate reconnaissance aircraft engaging targets directly, except under extraordinary circumstances. This specialization reflected industrial constraints and training philosophy. Producing multiple aircraft types for specific missions allowed optimization of each design. Pilot training could focus on mastering particular aircraft and tactics. The system worked effectively when sufficient numbers of specialized aircraft were available. The American approach differed fundamentally. Industrial capacity allowed greater flexibility in aircraft procurement and deployment. More importantly, American doctrine emphasized adaptability. Aircraft designed for one primary mission could be modified and employed in secondary roles as tactical situations demanded. This philosophy extended throughout American military practice, reflecting a pragmatic approach to warfare that valued versatility over rigid specialization. Senior naval aviation figures had envisioned this patrol aircraft as more than a reconnaissance platform. They saw potential for it to serve as a striking arm, particularly when carrier-based aircraft were unavailable or when extended range exceeded carrier aircraft capabilities. By June 1942, this doctrinal difference had created a critical gap in Japanese threat assessment. Intelligence officers knew patrol squadrons operated these aircraft throughout the Pacific. They understood the reconnaissance capabilities. What they failed to anticipate was that these patrol aircraft, under American doctrine, could and would be employed as night strike platforms when tactical situations demanded such. Operations, the night torpedo attack, represented not improvisation but the culmination of deliberate tactical development. In the months preceding the battle, patrol wings operating from Hawaii had conducted extensive training in offensive operations. Officers recognized that squadrons would need to engage enemy forces directly, given limited resources for defending American outposts across the vast Pacific. Training crews to deliver torpedoes from the slow, ungainly aircraft required solving significant technical challenges. The torpedo was temperamental, prone to running too deep or failing to arm properly after water entry. The weapon required precise release parameters. Drop altitude needed to remain between 50 and 200 feet. Airspeed at release couldn't exceed 110 knots, forcing the aircraft to slow from normal cruising speed. Squadrons received specially modified aircraft equipped with radio altimeters. These provided accurate height information during low-level flight over water, crucial for maintaining precise altitude needed for torpedo release. Without visual reference to the surface in darkness, pilots relied entirely on instruments. Crews practiced night navigation using primitive radar equipment, capable of detecting surface vessels at ranges of approximately 20 miles under optimal conditions. They learned to interpret radar returns, distinguishing between weather formations, land masses, and ships. They practiced approaching targets at wave-top altitude, using the ocean's surface to mask their approach. Bombardiers trained extensively with analog computing devices mounted in nose compartments. These instruments allowed input of target bearing, speed, and range, then mechanically calculated proper release points. Mastering this required hours of practice, first on training ranges, then in exercises against friendly vessels simulating enemy movements. 4 aircraft departed on the evening of June 3rd. Each carried a single torpedo and sufficient fuel for an 8-hour mission. Crews had been briefed on the approximate position of Japanese forces spotted earlier that day at 700 nautical miles distance. The 4 aircraft separated to search different sectors, maximizing coverage of probable convoy routes. One pilot, flying the southernmost search pattern, made radar contact at approximately 1:30 in the morning. He maneuvered for an attack approach from the south, placing the convoy between his position and the moon. This geometry provided improved visibility of target silhouettes, while keeping his aircraft in relative darkness. His torpedo struck the tanker at 1:53. The other 3 aircraft attacked different vessels but failed to achieve hits. One dropped its weapon too early, another released at excessive altitude, causing the weapon to run deep beneath the target. The third encountered mechanical problems with the release mechanism. Only one crew executed all parameters correctly, demonstrating both the mission's difficulty and the skill required for success. Japanese destroyer escorts responded by firing anti-aircraft weapons blindly into darkness. Searchlights swept the sky attempting to illuminate attackers. None of the aircraft sustained serious damage. They climbed to altitude and set course back, arriving as dawn broke. The Japanese Combined Fleet Commander received reports of the torpedo attack by mid-morning. His staff noted the unusual nature of the assault, but didn't revise their assessment of American patrol aircraft capabilities. The focus remained on the impending carrier engagement. The night attack was viewed as an isolated incident rather than standard tactical doctrine. This interpretation proved fundamentally flawed. The battle concluded days later with catastrophic losses for Japan. 4 fleet carriers had been sunk. Hundreds of irreplaceable naval aviators were dead. The strategic initiative had shifted permanently to American forces. Yet within this overwhelming defeat, the torpedo attack represented something commanders initially failed to recognize as significant. The capability demonstrated by that single aircraft would manifest repeatedly in the months ahead, with devastating consequences for Japanese logistics and combat operations. In August 1942, American forces landed on an island in the Solomons, seizing a partially completed airfield. The campaign became the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific theater. Japanese forces established a supply route running at night, attempting to avoid American air attack. Patrol wing operations expanded to counter this threat. Crews began experimenting with night attack tactics. Several aircraft were painted entirely black using improvised mixtures. The paint scheme made aircraft nearly invisible against night sky and ocean surface. Flight crews discovered that flying at extremely low altitude rendered the slow aircraft almost immune to fighter interception. Enemy night fighters, attempting to dive on low-flying targets, risked flying into the ocean due to poor depth perception in darkness. By December, officially designated black-painted aircraft arrived. Squadrons would fly hundreds of missions over following months, the vast majority during night operations. They carried bombs or torpedo and bomb combinations beneath wings. High-powered illuminating flares allowed crews to mark targets. Fragmentation bombs supplemented primary ordnance. Tactics evolved rapidly through combat experience. Aircraft would depart bases at dusk, arriving over enemy-controlled waters after full darkness. Crews flew search patterns at low altitude using radar to locate vessels. Upon contact, they would climb to bombing altitude and approach from unexpected directions. Illuminating flares would be dropped first, positioned to backlight target vessels, while blinding anti-aircraft gunners looking toward the flare. Delayed fuse bombs would then be released, allowing them to penetrate below waterlines before detonating, causing flooding more difficult to repair than topside hits. After bomb runs, aircraft would descend back to wavetop altitude and make strafing passes with waist-mounted machine guns. The psychological effect proved as valuable as physical damage. Enemy troops on ships and shore installations never knew when an attack might appear. Crews enhanced psychological impact by dropping empty bottles through hatches. The bottles, sometimes fitted with razor blades, created haunting screeches as they fell, adding to terror experienced by troops below. Japanese response proved inadequate. Night fighters struggled to locate low-flying aircraft. Anti-aircraft fire directed at engine sounds frequently missed actual aircraft positions. Even when gunners spotted targets, slow speed made calculating proper lead difficult. Shells often passed ahead or behind. The aircraft's rugged construction allowed it to absorb significant battle damage and continue flying. Multiple crews returned to base with dozens of holes in wings and fuselage, yet remained airworthy. By early 1943, 14 squadrons operated throughout the Pacific theater. The cumulative effect devastated Japanese logistics. Ships that successfully avoided American air attack during daylight found themselves vulnerable at night. Convoys attempting to resupply forward positions suffered steady attrition. Material reality created statistical evidence impossible to ignore. Between September 1942 and spring 1945, squadrons sank or damaged thousands of tons of shipping. Individual aircraft averaged 6,000 to 8,000 tons of enemy shipping destroyed or damaged per month. 14 squadrons operating simultaneously created aggregate impact that significantly degraded Japanese logistical capability, the offensive payload, capacity that Japanese intelligence had documented but dismissed became the decisive factor. 4,000 pounds of ordnance delivered accurately produced effects comparable to far more numerous attacks by specialized bombers. The aircraft's endurance allowed crews to remain over target areas for extended periods, making multiple attack runs and adjusting tactics based on observed results. Japanese after-action reports consistently mentioned surprise as a factor. Crews maintaining watch during darkness focused on detecting surface threats from submarines or torpedo boats. The possibility of air attack at night, executed by slow patrol aircraft, lay outside their conceptual framework. Even after months of repeated attacks, forces struggled to develop effective countermeasures. The doctrinal gap had evolved into an operational crisis. Japanese patrol aircraft remained employed exclusively for reconnaissance. No equivalent night attack capability existed. Specialized bomber units were committed to daylight operations or strategic missions. Industrial production statistics reveal the material foundation of American tactical flexibility. By mid-1943, over 3,000 aircraft had been produced. Production continued at multiple facilities operating around the clock. Peak monthly production reached 97 aircraft. Japanese flying boat production totaled fewer than 200 comparable aircraft throughout the entire war. A superior design introduced later achieved production of only 167 aircraft. The numerical disparity meant American forces could afford to employ aircraft in high-risk offensive roles. Losses could be replaced. Japanese forces lacked this flexibility. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate tactical effects. Troops occupying island garrisons learned to dread nightfall. The possibility of attack created constant stress. Sleep deprivation became endemic as soldiers remained alert throughout darkness, scrambling to shelters at first sounds of aircraft engines. Work details attempting to repair airfields or construct fortifications found their efforts disrupted by harassment attacks. The cumulative effect degraded combat effectiveness and morale. Captured documents and post-war interviews confirmed that American patrol aircraft capabilities had been systematically underestimated. Intelligence assessments correctly identified specifications but failed to anticipate how those specifications would be employed tactically. The bomb capacity existed in intelligence files as documented fact. The implications of that capacity combined with American willingness to employ reconnaissance aircraft offensively were not properly analyzed. This failure of imagination stemmed from doctrinal assumptions deeply embedded in naval aviation culture. Aircraft fulfilled specific roles. Reconnaissance aircraft scouted. Attack aircraft struck. Categories didn't overlap because the system had been designed with clear functional separation. American practice, informed by different industrial and doctrinal foundations, rejected such rigid categorization. The result was a significant advantage that enemy forces could recognize but couldn't effectively counter, given their organizational and industrial constraints. Operations continued to expand through 1943 and into 1944 as American forces advanced. Allied air forces adopted similar tactics, forming squadrons. Crews operated from bases conducting mine-laying missions deep into enemy-controlled waters, mining harbors along the coast. The mines disrupted shipping routes and forced vessels into predictable channels where submarines could intercept them. Crews developed their own variations on harassment tactics. The technique required no specialized equipment and could be implemented with readily available materials. It represented the practical innovation that characterized operations throughout the war. The offensive capability extended beyond the Pacific theater. In the Atlantic, squadrons equipped with radar and magnetic anomaly detection equipment hunted submarines with devastating effectiveness. The aircraft's endurance allowed extended patrols over convoy routes. When submarines were detected, they could attack with depth charges or call in surface vessels for coordinated attacks. One aircraft achieved 3.5 confirmed submarine kills, making it the highest-scoring submarine hunter of the war. The aircraft remained operational into the 21st century, preserved as a flying example of patrol aviation. The versatility demonstrated in combat validated pre-war planning. The vision of a multi-role platform capable of reconnaissance, strike operations, and rescue missions had been realized beyond initial expectations. The aircraft designed in 1933 for patrol duties had evolved into one of the war's most valuable assets. More than 3,000 served with United States forces and allied nations. Japanese response evolved slowly and proved ultimately inadequate. Night fighter units received better training and equipment, but the fundamental challenge remained: intercepting low-flying targets in darkness. Over-water required capabilities. Industry couldn't provide in sufficient quantities. Radar-equipped night fighters existed in limited numbers and were prioritized for home defense. Forward bases operated with minimal electronic detection equipment. Some commanders attempted to reduce vulnerability by dispersing vessels and installations. Others increased anti-aircraft defenses around critical facilities. These measures provided marginal improvements but couldn't eliminate the threat. The strategic implication was profound. Enemy forces couldn't move supplies safely during daylight due to American fighter aircraft. They couldn't move safely at night due to patrol operations. The logistical system necessary to sustain forward garrisons gradually collapsed under sustained pressure. The doctrinal lesson was equally significant. Rigid categorization of aircraft by mission type created vulnerabilities that an adversary with flexible doctrine could exploit. Naval aviation had been designed for a specific kind of war, one in which specialized units executed well-defined roles according to established procedures. When confronted with an enemy willing to employ reconnaissance aircraft as night bombers, platforms as rescue vehicles, and transport aircraft as improvised gunships, the system proved unable to adapt effectively. Post-war analysis by naval officers acknowledged this fundamental weakness. The assumption that American forces would employ equipment according to primary design purpose had been proven incorrect repeatedly. American tactical innovation, enabled by superior industrial production and supported by flexible doctrine, had created capabilities planners hadn't anticipated. The transformation from reconnaissance platform to night strike aircraft exemplified this pattern. The specifications had been documented. The implications hadn't been understood until combat made them undeniable. The men who flew these missions experienced warfare unlike almost any other aviation role. Missions lasted 8 to 12 hours, often conducted entirely in darkness over hostile waters. Crews departed knowing they would spend the night hunting for targets while enemy forces hunted for them. The psychological strain of extended night flying combined with constant threat of interception or anti-aircraft fire created unique pressures. One lieutenant exemplified the courage required. In February 1944, American aircraft were shot down over a harbor. He and his crew performed 4 separate water landings under fire from shore batteries to rescue downed airmen. Each landing and takeoff carried enormous risk. The aircraft, heavily overloaded with survivors, struggled to achieve flying speed on rough water. Enemy gunners had the aircraft under direct observation and fired continuously. He successfully rescued 15 men and returned them safely. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, one of the highest recognitions of valor in American military service. The rescue role became one of the aircraft's most celebrated missions. Those performing search and rescue duties earned the nickname Dumbo after the cartoon elephant that could fly. The ability to land on water, take aboard survivors, and fly them to safety saved thousands of lives during the war. After a heavy cruiser was sunk by submarine in July 1945, one pilot rescued 56 sailors from shark-infested waters. He landed his aircraft in 12-foot swells, an action considered nearly impossible under such conditions because men were dying in the water and immediate rescue was essential. These rescue operations occurred throughout the Pacific, often under combat conditions. Crews would receive distress calls and immediately respond, flying into contested waters where enemy aircraft or ships might be present. The slow speed that made the aircraft vulnerable in combat became an advantage for rescue work. It could loiter over survivors for extended periods, circling while coordinating with surface vessels or waiting for seas to calm. For Japanese forces, the aircraft represented a persistent, inescapable threat that undermined morale and operational effectiveness. Soldiers and sailors stationed on isolated garrisons knew American patrol aircraft operated overhead every night. The possibility of sudden attack created constant anxiety. Troops attempting to rest after daylight combat operations found sleep disrupted by sounds of aircraft engines or whistling ordnance. Even when attacks didn't materialize, the anticipation wore down personnel over weeks and months of deployment. Japanese pilots tasked with intercepting described the frustration of hunting an enemy they could hear but rarely see. The matte black paint made visual detection nearly impossible except under bright moonlight. Radar sets provided limited capability. Pilots would vector toward reported engine sounds, searching darkness, burning fuel without achieving contact. The slow speed created additional difficulty. Fighters approaching at high speed would overshoot before identifying targets. Attempts to slow down and circle back often resulted in losing contact entirely. The cumulative psychological effect contributed to deteriorating effectiveness throughout the Pacific. Units subject to repeated harassment reported increased illness, reduced alertness during daylight operations, and declining combat effectiveness. Constant stress combined with inadequate food supplies, limited medical care, and isolation from reinforcement created conditions that degraded unit cohesion. For American crews, knowledge that their operations significantly disrupted enemy logistics and morale provided motivation during difficult and dangerous flights. They understood their role in the larger strategic picture. Every ton of shipping sunk, every airfield rendered temporarily unusable, every night of disrupted rest contributed to American advance. The accumulation of small victories achieved by individual aircraft over hundreds of missions created effects at the strategic level. When the war ended in August 1945, the patrol flying boat had compiled a combat record few aircraft could match. More than 3,000 examples had been built. They had served in every theater from the Arctic to the Southwest Pacific, from the Atlantic to the China coast. They had located enemy fleets at crucial battles. They had hunted submarines in the North Atlantic. They had bombed and torpedoed shipping throughout the Pacific. They had rescued thousands of downed airmen and shipwrecked sailors. They had performed nearly every mission imaginable except high-altitude strategic bombing and fighter combat. The transformation from reconnaissance platform to multi-role combat aircraft reflected broader patterns in American military effectiveness. Industrial capacity provided the foundation, making it possible to produce sufficient numbers to risk in offensive operations. Flexible doctrine allowed commanders to employ equipment in non-standard roles when tactical situations demanded innovation. Crew training emphasized adaptability, teaching aviators to master multiple mission types rather than specializing narrowly. These factors combined to create military forces capable of responding effectively to unforeseen challenges. The Japanese failure to anticipate or counter this flexibility stemmed from different national circumstances and choices. Limited industrial capacity forced prioritization of specialized equipment for primary missions. Doctrinal rigidity reflected a military culture that valued precision and adherence to established procedures. Training systems focused on producing highly skilled specialists rather than versatile generalists. These approaches had proven effective in the early war period when forces held the initiative and fought according to preferred operational methods. When confronted with forces that refused to fight according to expected patterns, the system proved unable to adapt effectively. The assumptions that reconnaissance aircraft would remain reconnaissance aircraft, that slow-flying boats couldn't threaten surface vessels. That night, operations required specialized equipment and training. All these assumptions proved incorrect. The evidence accumulated over years of combat, yet underlying industrial and doctrinal constraints prevented effective response. The story carries lessons beyond specific details of combat. It demonstrates the danger of assuming adversaries will employ capabilities in predictable ways. Japanese intelligence had documented American equipment accurately. The failure lay not in collection, but in analysis and imagination. The specifications were known. The implications of those specifications, when combined with American doctrine and industrial capacity, were not fully understood until combat made consequences undeniable. It illustrates the value of flexible doctrine and adaptable forces. The ability to employ a reconnaissance aircraft as night bomber, rescue vehicle, or submarine hunter provided American commanders with options their opponents lacked. This flexibility compensated for technological deficiencies in specific areas and created multiple dilemmas for enemy planners attempting to defend against diverse threats. It highlights the relationship between industrial capacity and tactical innovation. American forces could afford to experiment with unconventional tactics because losses could be replaced. The abundance of equipment enabled risk-taking that might have been impossible with more limited resources. This material foundation supported the doctrinal flexibility that characterized operations throughout the war. On that night in June 1942, when the torpedo struck the tanker, something more significant than damage to a single vessel occurred. The attack demonstrated a capability commanders hadn't anticipated, employed in a manner their doctrine didn't accommodate. The pattern would repeat thousands of times over following years as squadrons ranged across the Pacific, disrupting logistics, destroying shipping, and undermining enemy morale. The slow, ungainly flying boat that intelligence had correctly identified as a reconnaissance aircraft became one of the most effective offensive weapons in the American arsenal. Not because its specifications changed, but because American forces understood how to employ those specifications in ways their adversary had failed to imagine. Capabilities matter less than how they are employed. Doctrine must remain flexible enough to accommodate tactical innovation. Industrial capacity enables operational flexibility that rigid systems cannot match, and assumptions about enemy behavior, even when based on accurate intelligence about enemy equipment, prove dangerous when they fail to account for differences in doctrine, training, and willingness to adapt. The patrol flying boat carried 4,000 pounds of bombs and torpedoes. Japanese intelligence knew this. They simply never believed it mattered, until the bombs began falling through darkness and torpedoes began striking their ships, night after night, across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean. The lesson echoes across decades. In warfare, as in all human endeavor, imagination and adaptability often triumph over rigid adherence to established doctrine, no matter how carefully constructed that doctrine may be.